On the night I turned 72, amidst the sound of jazz and strings of golden lights, I saw my daughter-in-law lean in and pour an invisible dust into the champagne glass engraved with my name, on the very night I announced I would donate 80% of my fortune. 40 guests still laughed and chatted, only I understood that the next 7 minutes would decide whether the party became a celebration or an obituary. I did not call security, nor did I step off the stage. Instead, I chose a gesture smaller than half a breath to turn the tide and let the truth reveal itself before everyone's eyes. The story begins in that moment when family, greed, and justice met at the rim of a crystal glass. My daughter-in-law thought I saw nothing when the tip of her finger brushed the rim of my flute, dusting a breath of powder into the champagne at my 72nd birthday party, the very night I announced I would give away 80% of my fortune. The powder folded into the gold as if it had never existed. Only the string lights caught a tiny whirl before it vanished. After that announcement, I read a frost-cold arithmetic in Amanda's eyes. If my signature never appeared, that number would return to its rightful place. Her fatal mistake was forgetting my bedroom window was ajar, reflecting the entire table like a giant mirror. While she stepped out to receive an artificial bouquet at the gate, I set my hand on the silver tray the way any courteous host would. My palm was dry, my wrist steady. A half turn, glasses reset, the chill of the wine against my skin like a reminder to stay calm, just a light twist, as if I were straightening the etched logo on crystal. When she raised her flute to toast my generosity, she had no idea what she was about to drink. What happened in the next 60 seconds froze 40 guests mid-smile. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you believe people truly change, or if greed simply peels off the mask. The tension at my 72nd felt invisible to my guests, but it sat on my chest like weight. That heaviness wasn't age. It was the instinct of someone who has stood through 100 hard negotiations when the air changes its scent, you know. Autumn wind threaded through the oaks of my Greenwich garden, fresh-cut grass mixed with the climb of heirloom roses. String lights were draped above the fountain, bright enough to throw little constellations across the crystal flutes. I let my mind slide back exactly 1 week, to the moment the road bent. I had called Mark and Amanda into my mahogany-paneled study that Tuesday afternoon, the room where I built Thompson Pharmaceuticals across more than 4 decades. The wood was warm as honey, the grain like palm lines. A photograph of my late wife rested beside a scale model of our first plant, and the pendulum clock counted a patient beat. Mark sat expectant 42, still buoyed by the generous allowance I had floated him since college. He adjusted a cufflink out of habit. Amanda, 36 and calculating, set her handbag across her knees. Lacquered nails ticked a soft rhythm on the leather, her gaze fixed on the edge of my desk. I spoke in bullet points, the way I deliver a project brief. I'm selling the company. Timeline: 6 months. Mark's eyes lit with dollar signs. When do we start planning the investments? The silence after my next sentence rang. 80% will go to the Children's Medical Research Foundation. I slid a slim folder toward them, not a full contract, just a sketch of the structure with the foundation's name running across the page. 20% covers your mother's and my retirement, with modest inheritances for you both down the line. Amanda's knuckles blanched. Her wedding band tapped the chair's edge with a small, hard click. 80%, Richard? That's our family's money. That's Mark's inheritance, she snapped. Mark, emboldened, added, We've been loyal for years, every company event, every charity dinner. We deserve better than scraps. Deserve hovered between us, weightless, sharp as a blade. Everyone deserves, until you ask, paid with what? They had never asked about the 60-hour weeks I stacked for years, never about the things I sacrificed. They saw the staircase of marble and the table set on time, and assumed success transferred the way eye color does. I'll announce this at my birthday, I said, watching Amanda's face flush. Not to humiliate anyone, but so the people who walked with me know where the money will flow, she hissed. Everyone will know we've been cut out. The door thudded shut like a verdict. Outside, rubber scribbled a scorched line across dry leaves. A week of silence followed. My phone filled with everything but what mattered. Mark's thread ended on, "We'll talk tomorrow." Then, this morning, Amanda's voice turned syrupy. Apologies for their emotional reaction, a sweet request to attend the party to support my decision. Her pivot from fury to praise shone like guilt, bright on the surface, too thin to be trusted. Now, as I watched her glide through my guest satin dress the color of smoke, a citrus-warm perfume trailing after her smile even, eyes measuring, I wondered what had truly changed her mind. She moved as if the evening had been rehearsed. And I, from the very first flicker at the window, knew the script she didn't know I had read. That Tuesday afternoon, I invited Mark and Amanda into my study, the room that has heard every business plan and oath of loyalty I ever made. The pendulum clock ticked a soft beat, as if marking the second the road would bend. Mahogany gleamed the color of honey, the air held leather from the club chairs and a faint bloom of Parker ink across the blotter. Mark, 42, sat upright, but his shoulders had learned the angle of reliance. The chair's leather seemed to dip where habit had taught it to. He turned a cufflink without thinking, a tell I'd seen whenever he expected good news about money. Amanda, 36, calculated down to each breath. She had quit pharmaceutical sales the day she married into my family, like someone closing a lifetime deal. Deep red nails tapped a measured rhythm along the chair arm, and her wedding band threw a cold glint onto the wood. I spoke as if reading an agenda item. "I'm selling the company. Timeline, 6 months. A grid flashed through Mark's eyes, spreadsheets where the returns column sums itself. He leaned forward, as if the money were already tipping his way. He asked one thing, and only one: when do we build the portfolio? As though the outcome naturally belonged to him. I slid a thin folder across the desk, the logo of the Children's Medical Research Foundation embossed, and 80% underlined in bold blue ink on the first page. The silence that rose was thick. A fountain pen rolled a single circle and came to rest. 20% is for your mother and my retirement, along with modest inheritances for you both at the right time. Amanda's fingers tightened until her knuckles blanched. Metal clicked as her ring met the wood. The corner of her mouth twitched, though the social smile held. 80%, Richard? That is this family's money, she said, weighing each word. That is Mark's inheritance. Mark, borrowing her momentum, added, "We've shown up to every company event, every charity gala. That counts for something." Deserve hung in the air, weightless and sharp as a blade. Everyone deserves, until someone asks, paid with what? I straightened the stack of papers, set the pen back in its groove. Amanda's glance flicked toward the safe and came back to my face, a computation just finished. The study felt less like a family room and more like a boardroom, 2 would-be shareholders demanding dividends, and me talking about mission. "I chose your mother instead of Mom on purpose," I said, evenly. "The line between responsibility and privilege needs to be drawn clean." "We deserve more than crumbs," Mark pressed on, as if ethics could be converted to equity. I closed the folder. The mahogany grain threw back 3 faces: a father, a husband, and a player who refused to accept losing. The word deserve hung between us like a thin blade, soundless, ice-cold. A fountain pen rolled one short circle on the desk blotter and stopped. The silence that followed felt as dense as a signed verdict. They were 2 able-bodied adults who had chosen leaning over standing, privilege over sweat. Not once had they asked about the 60-hour weeks I stacked to build this company, the red-eye flights, the first holiday I missed, or the old callus on my thumb from mixing our earliest test batches by hand. They saw the marble staircase and the dinner served on time, and assumed prosperity passed down like eye color. "I'll announce this at my birthday," I said, keeping my tone level, "so the people who stood shoulder to shoulder with me know the money will flow to where it sustains life. Friends should know about the Foundation's new funding." I pushed a slim folder toward them, the title, Children's Medical Research Foundation, embossed in relief, 80% underlined in dark blue ink. Amanda's face flushed. She blinked quickly, nails tapping the chair arm. Her wedding band scraped the wood with a tiny click. Through her teeth she hissed, "You're going to humiliate us in public. The whole city will know we're being pushed out," she added, voice lowered but edged. "No one is pushed out of honest work and decency," I said evenly. "Only out of the illusion of inheritance. This isn't a lesson I'm giving you. It's a lesson you owe yourselves, knowing the difference between earning and expecting." Mark tried to ride her momentum. "We've been at every company event, every charity gala. That counts for something. We deserve more than scraps." He said it as if ethics could be converted to equity. The word deserve stayed on the desk like a paper knife, no blood, but sharp enough to slice through fantasy. "I chose your mother, not mom, on purpose." The border between responsibility and privilege needed a clean line. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. Outside, tires scrawled a black line through dry leaves and left the sting of scorched rubber. 1 week dragged by with silence, my screen offering nothing but scene under Mark's last unfinished message. This morning Amanda's voice turned to syrup, apologies for an emotional reaction, and a sweet request to attend the party to support my generous decision. She once sold medicine. She knows the tone that lowers defenses. Unfortunately for her, I could still smell the technique in every word. I closed the folder and looked into the late light falling across the oaks, calm on the surface. But I already knew where the storm would choose to break. In front of the candles, the glasses, and the guests, when I said the number out loud. Public is light, and light does 2 things: it reveals, and it refines. Her role switch from fury to support gleamed like gilt, glossy on the surface, too light to trust. The smile landed at the right amplitude, the gaze held for the right duration. Even her nod seemed metronomed. She drifted through my guests as if the evening had been dress-rehearsed, satin hem whispering over grass, a perfume of bitter orange and warm woods trailing behind. Each time she paused with someone, her hand settled on a forearm for exactly 3 beats, then withdrew close enough to win warmth, far enough to keep control. Amanda doesn't accept defeat. She only changes angles, like a chess player shifting from attack to defense before springing a counter. Sales training had taught her to read the rim of a pupil for stress, to match her pace to another person's breathing, to frame questions that make people walk themselves to her conclusions. She understands how active compounds act on a body, and when effects tend to show enough to know what might make a stumble look natural. Most of all, she holds composure the way a surgeon holds a scalpel. Laughing with Dr. Robert Mitchell by the champagne table, she made a half-turn just enough to screen the cluster of crystal flutes from most lines of sight. Her eyes skimmed the ice bucket, tallying bottles, then ticked toward the bandstand, marking the pause between songs, the little dark spaces of time when crowds grow inattentive. And though her expression stayed hospitable, her gaze kept finding me, the way a compass needle finds north, warm on the surface, iron cold at the core. When I caught her looking, she converted it to the smallest crease of concerned sympathy, as if silently inquiring after my health. The woman who had screamed about family money 7 days earlier now wore the costume of the dutiful daughter-in-law, and every survival instinct I'd honed across 40 years began ringing. Mark, by contrast, seemed genuinely chastened. He set his phone face down, leaned in when I spoke about the Foundation's mission. For the first time, his questions were about impact rather than returns. If Mark moved toward me, Amanda moved toward the layout, 2 vectors sketching the silent divide between husband and wife. She kept station at the room's intersections, near the champagne, with a clean sightline to the gate, just off the string lights where reflections show most clearly on glass. She traced the waiter's routes, the neighbor clusters, the band's rhythm breaks a living map that kept updating. She even brushed a brief conversation past Rachel Collins, the only guest who could have unraveled any scheme on legal grounds, then stepped away before details could take root. Every gesture seemed curated. Each time she lifted her flute, she dabbed the rim with a napkin before setting it onto a coaster, an orderly habit, or a habit of erasing traces. At intervals, her glance ticked to the front gate, steady as a clock waiting, it seemed, for a signal or a perfect pretext to exit the stage. The wind shifted. The lights above gave a faint tremor. The fountain's hush grew newly distinct, the kind of small changes a practiced instinct reads as omens. I smiled and played the host, but positioned myself in shadow, the better to watch without being watched. I traded a few soft words with Father Patrick O'Connor, long enough to keep my vantage while my attention held the corner of the crystal table where Amanda's hand liked to rest. Her performance was immaculate, so immaculate it betrayed itself. Perfection, after all, is a motive wearing makeup. The party slipped into its perfect rhythm. Talk poured like wine, laughter bounced off warm brick under the glow of lights. A thin breeze pushed the scents of oak leaves and chrysanthemums between clusters of guests, tickling the tea candles so their flames trembled. String lights draped across the oaks, laid down a honeyed wash. Round tables in ivory linen wore rings of gerbera and maple leaves. At the center, the fountain threw bright arcs that caught the crystal flutes like short-lived stars. The quartet eased into autumn leaves, saxophone gliding, piano keeping just enough pulse to let conversation breathe. Dr. Robert Mitchell, my business partner of 3 decades, lifted his glass. To the most generous man in Connecticut. Thompson built not only wealth but character. His voice carried the gentle rasp of years' teaching, and I saw pride brighten his eyes. A warm, tight wave of applause followed. I smiled, feeling perhaps for the first time that week surrounded by people who understood me for more than my balance sheet. I touched rims with Laura and nodded to Daniel Patterson. Father Patrick O'Connor's handshake was steady and assuring. Rachel Collins, my attorney, stood nearby with a small, knowing smile. These were relationships built on respect, not on the gravity of my bank account. Even so, my gaze kept sliding back to Amanda as if drawn by a magnet. She moved through the crowd like a seasoned MC, the satin of her dress whispering over the grass. She grazed Laura Patterson's elbow for a single beat, released, tilted her head just so while listening textbook poise. She admired the cut of Laura's dress, then pivoted to ask Dr. Robert Mitchell about post-retirement plans with the ease of a discreet recruiter. With Father O'Connor, she brought up a weekend STEM class for teens, tapping a note into her phone as if she were a veteran of volunteer boards. Everything landed too precisely, smiles on cue, exclamations slotted in the right places. Perfection itself set off my instincts. I had watched her storyboard rooms before charity galas, who needed which compliment, who softened at which story. But tonight there was something else beneath the varnish, a hurried tempo, the hum of a plan waiting for the gap it could slip through. A server rotated the canapé tray for the 3rd time. On the champagne table, my engraved flute sat dead center like a display piece. From the bar came the faint clink of ice bin lids, somewhere a fork kissed porcelain with a thin metallic ping. Guests drifted away from Amanda, nodding, approving, and when they turned, a couple of glances exchanged a different verdict. She was very, very good. Too good. A draft lifted the edge of her satin hem. String lights flashed across crystal rims and then were gone. I realized I was counting how long she lingered near the champagne, an old defensive habit, not curiosity. I had seen her perform. Tonight, I was watching her direct. The quartet modulated keys. I shifted my vantage to see the crystal table more clearly. Instinct whispered what experience had taught me. Perfection always has a purpose. The quartet landed their last chord, and, in the small pocket of silence that followed, my phone buzzed. The screen flashed the name of the Children's Medical Research Foundation Dr. Emily Warren, the director I'd been working with on the gift structure. "Excuse me," I said to the nearest guests. "Foundation business." As I turned toward the house, I felt Amanda's gaze track me. Not casual but precise, like a predator clocking the exact line its prey would take. The call, I realized, might hand her the opening she had been waiting for all evening. I climbed to the primary bedroom for privacy. The balcony there offers the ideal compromise, quiet enough for a serious conversation, high enough for a clear view of the garden below. "Dr. Warren," I answered, stepping into the night air. "I hope you have good news." "Excellent news, Richard," she said. "The board voted unanimously. The structure is approved. We're prepared to receive funds as soon as Thompson closes. while she outlined logistics, escrow timelines, acknowledgement language, safeguards for restricted use. I let my eyes drift over the scene I had hoped this night would be. String lights laying down warmth over animated conversations, the fortunate sharing their good fortune without spectacle. Publicity will be handled delicately, Dr. Warren added. We know you prefer quiet generosity. I appreciate that, I said. I am sharing the news with close friends tonight. Through the rail, I watched the party's natural rhythm take shape. Dr. Robert Mitchell spoke with Father Patrick O'Connor about parish outreach. Laura and Daniel Patterson paused at the rose garden dedicated to my late wife. Mark, for once, seemed to be listening to music instead of checking his phone. Then a flicker at the edge of my vision pulled me up short. Amanda had moved, almost idly, to the champagne table. She positioned herself with her back to most of the guests, her body forming a gentle screen between the nest of crystal flutes and everyone else. She didn't look hurried. She looked placed like a piece set on a square she had chosen earlier. Richard, are you still there? Dr. Warren asked. I am, I managed, though my focus was now entirely below. Amanda's left hand reached for the bottle-perfect cover. Her right hand slipped into her handbag with the practiced ease of someone retrieving a business card at a conference. Something in my old training stirred. Years inside a pharmaceutical company teach you to read more than labels. My internal alarms began to ring quietly, insistently. She drew out something small, discreet, easy to fold in a palm. Doctor. Warren kept talking. Our transfer window is flexible, but her words dimmed as Amanda set herself directly beside my monogrammed flute, the one placed almost ceremonially at the center of the table. From above, I could see the care in each micro-movement, the angle of her shoulders, the way she kept her face open to the room, while her hands stayed close to the glassware, the rhythm of a person who has rehearsed motions until they look like nothing at all. The night air felt cooler, the string lights hummed faintly. Down in the garden, laughter swelled around the fountain. Up on the balcony, time narrowed to a point. Richard? Dr. Warren asked again. Gentle now. I'm here, I said, eyes locked on the table. Could we finalize the remaining details on Monday morning? Of course, she replied. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I said, my voice level. Just logistics on my end, and thank you for the good news. I ended the call and did not move. From where I stood, the evening's carefully staged grace, the lights, the linen, the music was still intact. Only I knew that, at its center, a different choreography was unfolding. Careful placement, practiced motion, immediate concealment. This was not impulse. This was intention. Amanda turned from the champagne as smoothly as she had arrived and drifted toward a cluster near the fountain, her manner bright, her gestures easy. No one else had seen what I had seen, but I had built a life by noticing the small thing that changes the whole picture. And from that balcony, looking down at my own engraved glass, I understood that the night had just shifted quietly, decisively into another kind of game. There was a sound smaller than the wind moving through the lights, just a quick snick sharp enough to cut through my heartbeat. From the rim of my flute, I saw tiny whirlpools rise and vanish as a fine dust slipped into the golden champagne, swallowed at once by impatient bubbles. Under the glow of the strings, the glass wore a faint phosphorescent halo and then nothing at all. Amanda gave the liquid the briefest, neatest motion, more suggestion than stir, and her ringed hand slid away from the stem with a cleanliness that chilled me. 15 seconds, no more, contained the whole transaction. Then she drifted toward the group by the fountain and poured her smile into their joke. Shoulders loose, the picture of ease. No one noticed. I had just watched my daughter-in-law attempt to kill me, and the garden applauded the band. Dr. Warren, something urgent has come up, I said into the phone, keeping my breath level. Could we finish the remaining details on Monday morning? Of course, Dr. Emily Warren replied, papers whispering on her end. Is everything all right? Logistics on my side, I answered. My voice held. Only my palm, suddenly damp, told the truth. Below, Amanda tipped her head back in laughter. The fountain broke into bright dust around her, an image so perfectly harmless it felt staged. But I knew what I had seen. Careful placement, practiced movements, immediate tidying. This was not impulse. This was intention. The same person who had screamed about family money now sought to decide the future of that money by erasing the one signature that mattered: mine. I gripped the iron rail until the chill bit my skin, a small bite to keep me awake. 3 years she had called me Dad, kissed my cheek at Christmas, wrapped herself in every ritual of belonging. Now the thin seam between performance and truth had split. My life in pharmaceuticals whispered its own warning. Amanda knew enough about effects and timing to make a collapse look ordinary. A stumble at 72 during an emotional celebration, anyone could be persuaded it was the heart, or strain, or champagne. Even inquiry, if it came, would likely meet coincidence first. I ran through 4 roads in my mind. First, call the police now without the smallest physical proof. The thing itself had dissolved by design. Second, confront her in front of my guests. She would pivot the story in a breath-concerned daughter-in-law, delusional patriarch, stress-induced paranoia. She is adept at turning accusation into an act of care. Third, drink and gamble on intervention. I do not wager with my life. Which left a fourth path: let the truth reveal itself, not through force, but through reflection. If she wished to play a game with a glass, then the glass would become a mirror, not retaliation exposure. I would draw her, politely and plausibly, away from the table just long enough. I would let her choreography meet its own reflection in the open air of the party. The point was not to trade harm for harm, but to let her plan confess itself in front of witnesses. I steadied my breathing 4 counts in, 4 counts out, slotting each thought back into its proper drawer. 40 years inside contested rooms had taught me, when an opponent pushes, pull. When they feel most certain, they leave a seam. Amanda believed she was writing a perfect scene. I needed only to tilt the mirror so she could see the script with her own name on it. Music helped. The quartet modulated keys. A clean, communal burst of applause rose like a curtain, sound thick enough to hide any small movement on the lawn. Down below, crystal caught and lost the light in quiet cycles. At the fountain, conversation swelled again, bright and oblivious. I left the balcony with dry hands on cold iron and crossed back into the house. The garden still looked like celebration. Linen, flowers, the careful abundance of a life I meant to give away. Somewhere in that arrangement sat a single decision, sharp as a chess move. The next moment would demand precision and a steady will. The board had been set by someone who thought there would be no countermove. She was wrong. I walked down the stairs with a gait honed by years of boardrooms, unhurried, shoulders square, no wasted motion. The banister felt cool under my palm. The dark velvet runner swallowed my footsteps so completely that only my pulse kept time in my chest. The host's smile stayed where it belonged. Only the artery at my neck, if anyone looked closely, betrayed a slightly quicker beat. Out on the lawn, the party kept its elegant tempo. The saxophone slid into a soft solo. The chime of glassware dissolved into the scent of oak leaves and chrysanthemums. Amanda stood just off the fountain, chatting with Dr. Robert Mitchell about small coves on the Mediterranean from his recent trip. Her head tilted at the exact angle, her shoulders loose, an unmarred portrait of the dutiful daughter-in-law. At the corner of her mouth I caught a held breath, a pause no thicker than a fingernail before the smile flowed on. Seeing me return, she lifted her chin by a degree, and the smile brightened as if it had been waiting. "How did the call go, Richard? Smooth with the foundation?" "Very smooth, thank you." "Dr. Warren sends her congratulations," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I turned a little toward her, making a private space inside the crowd. "Amanda." A spark crossed her eyes, perhaps thinking I was about to stage the perfect logistical perch for her beside the champagne. "My college friend, Richard Martinez, is stuck in an emergency board meeting in Boston," I said. "He just called to apologize for missing the birthday." I gestured toward the front approach. The gate lights threw a narrow ribbon of gold along the stone path. "He's sending a beautiful arrangement to the front gate. The driver may arrive earlier than expected." For a blink, her gaze skimmed the crystal table, then returned to me, flat as glass, as if it had never strayed. "Do you need me to?" There are specific instructions about where to place it, I said. Richard wants the arrangement facing the rose garden of her. My late wife's name moved through my throat like a small prayer. In front of Dr. Mitchell, refusal would taste too sharp. Amanda chose a gentle smile and a nod. She slipped her hand around my arm for an instant, the temperature calibrated to familiar. Of course, that's thoughtful of him. What kind of flowers? You know, Richard, something vivid enough for a proper apology. If in 10 minutes no one shows, I added, come back and we'll ring the florist. Happy to help, she said. Then, with an actress's grace, truly lovely. She turned toward the drive, her heels tapped evenly over the stone, each strike receding like an invisible countdown clock. A bitter note spread across my tongue, the taste of calculation meeting its fulcrum. I guessed she'd be doing her own arithmetic as she walked. How long to resolve this hiccup? How long to return in time for the moment that mattered? She didn't know she had just stepped out of the spotlight's pool, leaving behind a few rare minutes, exactly enough for me to turn the board. She had barely slipped past the oaks when I drew a clean line toward the champagne table, one decisive stroke. Overhead, the strand lights trembled and broke my shadow into jagged tiles across the stone. My flute was exactly where I'd left it, a thin halo of chill fog clinging to the crystal. The bubbles kept climbing as if unaware of the heavy secret they carried. Amanda's glass sat on the cocktail table. Fine floral etching, a razor-thin band of light along the rim. I'd chosen that set last Christmas. The thought pricked like a pin. This would be the strangest deal of my life. Exchange the positions of two glasses. If fortune favored me, I had about 7 minutes, long enough for composure, short enough to court error. I counted under my breath to the drum brush, keeping time on the far side of the lawn. I walked slowly, shoulders loose, nodding to Laura Patterson when she praised the garden lighting, as if performing a host's small rite. The scent of gerbera and cut grass washed a faint metallic taste from the back of my throat. In a small forest of crystal, my flute looked unnaturally serene, like a stone that doesn't move in the middle of a stream. I remembered Amanda admiring those glasses. The rim is perfect for champagne, a compliment that now sounded like foreshadowing. Father Patrick O'Connor paused beside me, his voice warm. Your announcement reached a great many hearts. Thank you, Father, I said, keeping my breath from trembling. I lifted my glass and felt the weight of a decision. The cold pressed into my index finger, a necessary jolt of clarity. If you'll excuse me, I'll top this up, I added, eyes already measuring the distance to Amanda's flute. 2 clusters of neighbors merged, and laughter quilted the patio, an acoustic curtain perfect for concealment. I positioned myself with my back to the lights, blocking the worst reflections off the glass-topped table. Then I tilted my flute the way one tilts an ear toward a secret. The liquid moved without a sound. A single bubble broke and left a fading ring of light. Seconds stretched into seasons. The gold slipped from one crystal to the other, carrying with it Amanda's intention. The irony was almost visible. The glass I had once given her would do the speaking for me tonight. When her flute was half full, I refilled my own from a newly opened bottle resting by the ice bucket. Condensation formed at once, clear and clean, like a different beginning. The quartet slid into its refrain. The string lights drew short, luminous dashes along the rims, as if marking off increments of time. I set my glass back exactly where it had been and smoothed a crease in my jacket with a napkin, a gesture of courtesy more than habit. A thin ache traced my collarbone. I straightened my shoulders and kept the role of host until the game was done. Everything was now in its place. Only the player who had stepped off stage was missing. I tapped the table leg lightly and told myself to breathe. Tonight, even breathing was part of the plan. Dad, there you are. Mark stepped in, eyes warm and steady. I was just telling the Pattersons about your work. They're genuinely impressed. He rested a hand on the back of a chair, letting a server pass an unexpectedly measured gesture. What matters is knowing how to give back, son. I set my now clean flute onto its coaster, not a millimeter off. Where's Amanda? I want her with us to get the toast ready. She said she was heading to the gate to help with Richard Martinez's arrangement. From the bluestone path came the measured click of heels, each beat closer, an overture announcing the player's return. Amanda appeared at the corner of the lawn. A flash of irritation skimmed her mouth and was instantly mortared over with a practiced smile. "No sign of the driver," she said, crisp and contained. "I waited at the gate. No one came. Probably a mix-up with the address." "Strange Richard is meticulous about timing," I replied, keeping my tone even. "No matter, we'll sort it later. What matters is, you're back just in time." "In time for what?" "To raise a birthday toast. Everyone's waiting." I lifted a hand toward the cluster of guests drawing together beneath the string lights. The saxophone slipped into a new refrain and poured a warm gold across the crystal. "Your glass is on the cocktail table, darling. You might want a fresh pour, it's been sitting a while." Her pupils widened a fraction. Her chin rose by half a degree, an unplanned posture of triumph. She moved toward the table and, as if by accident, stepped into a pocket of shadow that dulled the table's glare, precisely the angle where reflections caused the fewest questions. Around us, the stage assembled itself. Laura Patterson raised her camera to eye level. Father Patrick O'Connor stood beside Dr. Robert Mitchell, two witnesses bookending faith and medicine. I kept the smile of a host and let my hands hang loosely at my sides. Any sharper feeling I folded away like a pocket square. Amanda lifted her flute and touched a napkin to the rim, her cleanliness ritual, executed to the millimeter. In her mind, the timings meshed like gears. I would lift my glass, the crowd would applaud, and what followed would look natural. She did not know she was stepping into the very mold she had poured. The quartet struck a soft accent. A burst of laughter from a younger group rippled across the patio, sound enough to cover any small consequential movement. Mark edged back half a step to give his wife room, his other hand settling on my shoulder for a brief, steady squeeze, as if quietly choosing sides. I raised my hand and signaled the band to soften. The conversational circles tightened, faces turned as one. Everything sat exactly where it needed to be, waiting for the first syllable of the toast to strike the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I borrow this moment of quiet?" The quartet softened on cue. The string lights trembled almost imperceptibly, casting a pale gold nimbus across the lawn. 43 faces turned toward me, warm, bright, expectant. Somewhere a spoon kissed the rim of a glass with a thin, silvery note, and went still. Amanda stood near the front, cradling her flute between 3 manicured fingertips, nails glossed to a mirror under the lights. The pulse at her throat beat so faintly only someone close would have seen it. Perhaps she imagined this as the perfect backdrop. A crowd, the glow, and a tidy collapse from emotion. "This is a remarkable night," I began, lifting my clean glass toward the gathered friends. "To share this milestone with those who have carried me, challenged me, and stood beside me for years is an honor beyond words." Dr. Robert Mitchell dipped his head, the corners of his eyes damp. Father Patrick O'Connor folded his hands in a quiet benediction. Laura and Daniel Patterson clasped fingers, their faces bright with neighborly pride. "As many of you know," I went on, "I am directing the lion's share of the proceeds from the sale of Thompson Pharmaceuticals to the Children's Medical Research Foundation, 80%, to widen the corridor of possibility for children who need it most." Applause rolled up into the Oaks. Champagne foamed against crystal like a small celebration of its own. Amanda clapped in perfect rhythm, her smile unwavering by a hair's breadth, though I noticed her fingers tighten around the stem, then release. "But before we raise our glasses," I said, lowering my voice, "I want to speak about family and loyalty, things that only mean what they claim when they stand beside the truth." A thread of wind moved through the lights, and for a breath, the hush deepened. The smile on Amanda's mouth paused half a beat, then resumed. Her pupils drew in, as if she had just overheard a password she had not expected to hear. "Family celebrates one another's success, protects one another's dreams, guards one another from harm," I said, letting my gaze settle carefully on Amanda. "Family shelters, it does not poison." A fork slipped and rang against china, light, brittle, traveling the stone like a warning. A fine web of whispers laced itself through the guests. Several glances flicked toward Amanda, and just as quickly, away. "Richard, what are you saying? Are you all right?" Her voice was tuned tight as a newly wound string. "I am far better than I have been in years, Amanda." I raised my glass higher, meeting the sea of faces. The crystal threw a cool bar of light across my knuckles. "And I know who my family is, not necessarily those who share my blood or my name, but those who share my character." I signaled the band to drop the volume entirely. The light seemed to clarify the watching faces, one by one. Rachel Collins looked up from her conversation, expression gone very still. The flute in Amanda's hand gleamed beautiful and utterly silent, like a secret not yet called by its name. I let a few breaths pass long enough for truth to find its footing, short enough to deny anyone time to invent a different script. It was plain to anyone listening. This speech had just stepped off the path Amanda had planned. I lowered my glass by half an inch, an omen that the next words would call things what they were. She lifted the flute, the crystal rim just kissing her mouth a sliver-thin instant between pretense and truth. Threads of string light shattered into tiny shards on the glass, flickering right before her eye. "Amanda." I said her name once, clear, level, and the garden swallowed its breath. The sound bounced off the stone, and several heads turned in unison. "I trust you'll find that glass. To your taste," I added, calm enough to chill the air, much as you imagined I would. She went rigid, the flute still pressed to her lips. Only her pupils widened, the smallest bloom of fear finally called by its name. A nail pinged the stem one, sharp, betraying click. "I watched you," I said, as if reciting an itinerary already written. "I watched you add what you added, stir once, put the evidence away, each movement as practiced as rehearsal." I tipped my chin toward the champagne table. The silence there suddenly had weight. "You left as if the curtain had dropped, except the bedroom balcony was the front row." Her face cinched between fury and disbelief, a surface struck by a thrown stone. She snatched the flute from her mouth too late. The lateness arrived before the excuse. A gold bead broke on her lip and slipped downward like a memory she'd rather not own. "The plan stumbled on one pebble," I said without flourish. "I was on the balcony. And so," I went on, "I simply returned that little gift back to its rightful glass." Crystal slid from her trembling fingers, fell, and burst into rain-bright shrapnel. A ribbon of champagne streaked across the flagstones, the yeasty scent rising and vanishing in the same breath. The crack ricocheted like dry lightning, then was buried under a heavy hush. Somewhere in the far corner, one person inhaled sharply, the lone sound among 43. Rachel Collins tightened her grip on her folio. Dr. Robert Mitchell inclined on instinct, the clinician overtaking the guest. Father Patrick O'Connor touched his chest and murmured something too soft to catch. Mark stood a half-step behind me, stunned into stillness, his hand hovering above the back of a chair as if he'd forgotten why it was there. "That glass," I said more gently than the words deserved, "was the one I gave you last Christmas, a gift that tonight became a mirror." I set my own glass down so lightly the crystal barely brushed wood. "What you just drank, my daughter-in-law," I finished, letting each word drop like small stones into water, "is the story you wrote for someone else." I stepped back half a pace, making room for the truth to complete the rest. The wind eased, even the fountain seemed to hush, as though the garden itself understood the name of what had just been spoken. Shards of crystal littered the flagstones like fallen stars. Every sweep of the string lights turned them into glittering accusations. A breath of cold yeast rose and vanished. 43 faces held still silence thick as wool, each person hearing the thud of their own pulse louder than the music. Amanda clutched her throat, color ricocheting from bloodless to feverish. Her wrist trembled once, her nails bit the heel of her palm as if pinching composure back into place. "You're insane," she blurted, the last syllable collapsing on itself, as if even her breath couldn't believe her. "This is some kind of breakdown, Mark. Your father needs help." Mark's gaze ran from the glittering debris to the champagne table and back to his wife, a mental equation changing its sign in real time. "Amanda, what is he talking about? What powder?" Dr. Robert Mitchell stepped forward, the clinician overtaking the dinner guest. "If what he's saying is accurate, call an ambulance now. We need to know what we're dealing with." "I don't know the name of the compound," I said, keeping my voice level so the words could carry their own weight. "I know it came from a small packet she pulled from her purse." Amanda's knees softened. She caught the back of a chair, not sure whether she was bracing against panic or gravity. Father Patrick O'Connor reached out a steadying hand, voice pitched low and pastoral. "Child, if you're in distress, you need medical care immediately." "I am not your child," she snapped, then flinched at her own outburst, the mask slipping so far it couldn't be reset. Laura Patterson already had her phone out. Habit drove her thumb toward the emergency number. Amanda lurched, a stagger more than a step, her hand darting halfway toward Laura's wrist before stopping in midair. "Don't call anyone. I'm fine. He's having some episode." I didn't have to answer. The scene answered for me. An innocent person invites the exam, begs for the test, insists on proof. Her fear of outside intervention was writing its own affidavit. Mark moved in, gentle and devastated. "You always said you knew pharmaceuticals better than most doctors. Your last job, you said you understood how these things work." He swallowed. "If my father were actually having a break, medical care would help him. Why are you afraid of doctors?" She cut her eyes toward him, then toward me. Because this is a circus and—" "Everyone steady," said Rachel Collins, her lawyer's cadence cool and unyielding. "Do not touch anything on the table. If a crime occurred, we protect the scene." "A crime?" Amanda wheeled on her. "What crime? A raving old man spits out baseless accusations and I'm suddenly a felon." "This raving old man," I replied, still calm, "built a pharmaceutical company by understanding exactly how medicines act, and tonight there are 43 people who heard you tell your own story." Dr. Mitchell's eyes moved clinically carotid pulse, sheen at the temple, fine tremor in the fingers, elevated heart rate, diaphoresis, tremulousness, consistent with severe anxiety or an early physiological reaction. "Amanda, how much did you swallow?" "Nothing," she snapped. But even as the word left her mouth, her hand floated to her abdomen, and fear darkened her pupils. Mark drifted back one full step. His hand fell from the air like someone letting go of the last rope. "Oh God, Amanda, what did you do? What have you actually done?" The performance she'd maintained for 3 years cracked on the grain like lacquer in frost. "What was I supposed to do?" she shouted. The question shaped more like a blade than a plea. "Do you even know what it feels like to watch millions thrown away on strangers? That money should have been ours." The sentence hung there, the gun smoke of motive still curling in the air. Red and blue washed the garden as the ambulance turned in. Emergency lights painted the honeyed strings a harsh alarm green. In a blink, the party shifted hues from celebration to procedure. Paramedics cut through the crowd with practiced gentleness, asking for times, for sequences, for what anyone had seen. An officer began a notebook. Another ran yellow markers beneath the champagne table. They lifted Amanda onto the gurney, conscious but spent, her bravado reduced to a thin wire. Tragic symmetry without theatrics. The story she had authored for someone else had stepped out of the mirror and addressed its writer. As the wheels rolled, she twisted toward Mark, desperation flaring. "I did it for us," she whispered hoarsely. "For our future." Mark stared through her, the way a person stares at a portrait after realizing the signature is forged. "There was never an us, Amanda," he said, voice flat with revelation. "There was you and your greed." The siren folded into the steady hush of the fountain. The garden's warm gold resumed, but it no longer comforted. What began as a testament to generosity had become a record of testimony, names, statements, times, signed by silence and stripped of ambiguity. Red and blue strobes washed across the garden's honeyed strings, turning the soiree's palette into an emergency chart. Dr. Robert Mitchell briefed the paramedics in a steady, clinical cadence timestamps, observed signs voice of a man intimate with pressure. Beside him, Rachel Collins coordinated with arriving officers, reminding guests, Please don't touch the crystal table," while she drafted a witness list and jotted approximate times. My guests rearranged themselves from party circles into clusters of witnesses, each holding a half-finished flute as if cradling the version of the story they were about to tell. An officer ran a slim cordon around the champagne station, another photographed the glittered field of shattered crystal and slipped fragments into sealed bags. The last slice of cake waited untouched. The fountain's hush grew louder as the siren receded down the lane. Laura Patterson read back what she'd seen. Her hand trembled just enough that she set her glass onto a coaster to keep it from tipping. Around us, murmurs thinned into thread-like whispers, as if any louder sound might reawaken the moment we all wished weren't true. The quartet had stopped. The saxophone lay on a chair, its mouthpiece still warm. "I can't believe I didn't see it," Mark said, eyes rimmed red as he stepped in close. His shoulders sagged a notch. His fingers worried the hem of the linen and then let go as though releasing a long-held illusion. 3 years married and I never understood what she was capable of. The way she pushed me to talk to Dad about money. The parties she scheduled just to orbit the people most likely to open a checkbook. She knew who wanted compliments, who softened at charity, who melted for a sad story at exactly the right time. I let him finish. A single nod, to assure him he was heard. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, the words rough and simple. "I'm sorry I brought her into our house, and I'm sorry I let my blindness last this long." I set a hand on his shoulder light, steady. "Right now, tell the truth to them," I said, glancing toward the officers. "The law will take care of the rest." An officer asked me to confirm the sequence. When I began speaking, where each of us stood, who moved when, I answered point by point, as if reading minutes into the record. Rachel met my eye and gave a small, professional nod, the kind that says, "The process is working." Mark shook his head and stared into the dark seam between the oaks, as if searching for an alternate cut of the evening one where the truth had not stepped into the light. Around us, the garden kept changing color. Celebration, draining into statements and time codes. The night was narrowing into a ledger of testimony. What came next, the work of repair, wouldn't be captured in any report. I set my hand on my son's shoulder and felt the muscles slowly unclench. The heaviest thing tonight wasn't the accusation, it was his remorse. "You're not responsible for someone else's choices, Mark," I said, "but your future that you own." He looked around at the last strips of police tape and the silhouettes of a few officers still packing up. His gaze slid across his mother's rose garden and returned to me. "Will you ever forgive me for bringing her into our family?" "You loved a version she performed," I answered, quiet but firm. "That isn't a crime. The only real question is what you do with the truth now." "I remember what you said earlier about getting a real job," I added. "Let tomorrow begin with a resume you actually send." When the preliminary questions ended, the circle that remained around me was small and steady. Father Patrick O'Connor stepped in first, laying a hand on my forearm like a silent blessing. "Your calm tonight was remarkable, Richard." Dr. Robert Mitchell nodded. 40 years of negotiations taught you to keep a cool head. Most would have chosen fury over safety." "I just learned to think a few moves ahead," I said, "to know when to hold still and when to speak." Laura Patterson squeezed my hand, warmth that pulled me back from the last echo of sirens. I turned to those who were left. "The donation proceeds exactly as planned," I told them. "If anything, tonight sharpened the commitment. Generosity isn't only money leaving an account, it's deciding who still has a seat in your life." Rachel Collins snapped her briefcase shut. "At first light, I'll file the initial papers," she said. "Charges, divorce if Mark chooses, any will update step by step. Not hurried, not slow." "Thank you, Rachel," I replied. "My will already stands where it should." When the final cruiser rolled away, Mark and I sat on the terrace on the very stones where Amanda had tried to end a life hours before. Night air carried in the damp scent of grass. The string lights above us flickered as if counting back the evening, moment by moment. "So, what now, Dad?" "Now we rebuild," I said. "You find work that teaches you from the ground up. I keep the foundation moving, and I spend my years with the people who actually care." For the first time in a long time, I saw his real potential. "I want to be worthy of being chosen," he said. "When you choose rightly yourself, you're already halfway there," I told him. The night didn't close on the tragedy Amanda had scripted. It ended on clarity, the kind you earn by walking to the very edge and stepping back. Sometimes justice isn't retribution. It's letting a story return to its author. I believe in a quiet providence. When we pay close attention and act rightly, grace tends to find its path. The ones who stayed neighbors, a lawyer, a parish priest, are proof that kinship doesn't require blood or paperwork. Family is often just the chairs that remain when the guests have gone. Mark's repentance will be measured not by promises but by appointments kept, interviews made, work learned. Next week the Foundation will open another line of research. A few names on a pediatric ward will gain a different kind of hope. The resources I was given were meant to make a difference, and no greed will rob that purpose. If this story reached you, tell your part somewhere. Someone may need the courage to choose what's right. I dimmed the string lights. In the softened dark, what still shone was exactly what deserved to be kept.